Good morning and welcome back. Thanks for joining me today. A few weeks ago, I made a video on an application called Remote Desktop Manager by Devolutions, as well as a few other cool free tools that they provide. The first half of that video was all about Remote Desktop Manager Free Solo Edition, which is a remote desktop solution that lets you centralize all of your remote access needs under one roof, whether it's RDP, SSH, FTP, SFTP, over VPN, Apple Remote Desktop, doesn't matter. All of that can be managed within RDM Free. Since that video was more of like an overview and what I covered was pretty surface level, today's video is going to be going to like a medium level dive / tutorial, showing how you can kind of take your first steps and use some of its core features. Getting started with your first remote session, figuring out how the UI works, stuff like that. If you are somebody who considered giving this a try, but you were a little overwhelmed, hopefully this can provide some clarity and some confidence. Today's video is a part 2 of 2 of the Devolutions saga. Therefore, like the first video, this one is sponsored. This is a product that I've used almost every other day for the past 7 months. I got really lucky that the Devolutions team saw videos that I made about this product before we even worked together and liked me enough to ask to sponsor some content. Getting sponsored by people who make a product that you use and love is super dope. So if you're watching this on YouTube, you're supporting what I do, and thank you. Remote Desktop Manager can be downloaded at devolutions.net/remote desktop manager. And we're going to install this just like we would any other piece of software. Typical. Do not mess up my stuff. Actually, that's okay. I don't want you on the desktop. Depending on when this video hits the internet, you might see Remote Desktop Manager Free, or you might see Remote Desktop Manager Free Solo Edition. This is a newer naming convention for the free version of RDM, so just in case you go to download this and things are a little bit different. The first thing I want to explain with RDM is data sources. Your data source is a location where you're going to be storing all of your RDM data. So all of the hosts that you import, the credentials that you save, all your organizational data, that all gets saved in a data source file. With RDM Free by default, you're going to create a local data source, and that will live on the computer that you're installing it on and nowhere else. Of course, there are other options. If you want to use Devolutions server and you want to host all of that data on a different machine, on a server on your LAN, and then you can just run the client on your workstation, or you can do what I do and store your data source in the cloud using Devolutions Hub, which is also free. For the sake of the tutorial today, I'm just going to create a brand new local data source that only exists on this workstation, and then I'm going to sign into my cloud hosted one a little bit later and kind of show you what I've done there. IT professional or business user? To make this onboarding as easy as possible is start building a list of all of my endpoints, all the things that I want remote access to. Instead of having to manually add every single one of those hosts individually, RDM has a cool feature called Network Scan Import that scans your internal network and then imports any known hosts. This is a great way to just start building your list and organizing them without having to do a bunch of manual onboarding. While this is scanning, if you're not an IT person, or maybe you're just getting your feet wet in the IT field, I thought it'd be a good idea to mention that installing RDM doesn't just magically unlock all of these endpoints and add remote functionality to a device that doesn't support it. There are certain restrictions with home versions of Windows. You need to have remote access enabled or proper permissions given in order to remote into a machine. You have to have the username password for that device. You get the idea. So before you go and start trying to connect everything, just make sure the device that you're trying to connect to is set up and ready to receive incoming connections, or you're gonna have a bad time. So already I can see a bunch of devices that have been detected on my internal network. And on the left side, you can see a bunch of icons that tell you what type of session is being detected. You can have RDP, FTP, SSH, Apple Remote Desktop, and they all have their own icon. So I'm going to deselect all because I know I'm going to add way less than devices found. I will add my 2 Apple machines. I'll add all the ones I see for Remote Desktop, as well as all the ones that have SSH turned on. and hit import. Network scan is done. And if I open up the local data source on the left side, you'll see all of the hosts that I've imported from that network scan. Each entry has all of those same icons we saw before, RDP, SSH, and these two are Apple Remote Desktop. Why binoculars? Binoculars. I don't know. The first thing that I want to do is just add that additional data source, the one that I said I use in the cloud, and then we're just going to come back to it later. And that's also another cool thing. You can have multiple data sources and switch between them. You don't only have to have one. So File, Data Sources, going to right click, add a new data source, Devolutions Hub Personal, and I'll put in my email address that I use for this account. Whenever you open Remote Desktop Manager, you can say, hey, just use my default data source or prompt me each time so I can pick which data source I want to log into. So I'm going to do prompt because that's what I prefer. Hit save. So now that we have all of our endpoints here, let's just do a little bit of organization. We're going to create some folders to group these up because we can attach credential entries and templates to folders of devices. So this will help with organization down the road. So I'm going to right click, add folder, and I'm going to split this up between Home Lab and workstations. Home Lab, workstations. Under workstations, I'm going to have both Windows and Mac. So I want to create folders for each of those. And you don't have to do any of this. This is just how I built my data source. Add one more folder, Windows, add one more folder, Mac. So I'll take all of my unraid NASs, drop those into NAS. Yes, please. I have 2 NUCs. Now I'll take my Apple devices, drop those in. All of my networking equipment is Unify right now. I manage it all through the cloud. I don't do too much SSH or any remote access because they have remote access built into their software ecosystem already. But I'll drop that into networking and then this into workstations as well. The only workstation it didn't grab is the workstation that I'm using right now. So I'm going to show you how to do a manual add for things that might not have showed up in the network scan. If it didn't show up on the network scan, it's probably not on the network, which means you probably can't connect. I'm going to show you anyways. Right click, add session. I'm going to pause on this screen. Remote Desktop Manager has over 300 types of remote sessions that it supports. And these are all pre-built templates for all of the most commonly used ones. So if I search for something like remote or RDP, I can spell and type. This is a new keyboard. Come me a little slack. RDP, so I'll double click. So this screen right here, this dialog box is now crafted for RDP sessions. So for name, I'm gonna call this GOAT. It's the name of my gaming PC. And I know the IP address is, I'm gonna hit add, and then it places that RDP session in the Windows folder, in the workstation folder. So already all of these devices are ready to connect to, ready to remote access, as long as I have my credentials and such. Now that all my hosts are ready to go, I'm gonna create one more folder in each of these sections. So for Windows, I have a main set of credentials. For Macs, I have a main set of credentials, and then my unraid NASs have others. So under Windows, it's gonna create one more folder called credentials. Same for the Macs. Credentials. Did I spell that right? I think I did. And then Home Lab, under NASs, I'll create one more folder. So now what you can do with this is you can store your credentials in Remote Desktop Manager and then apply those credentials to as many hosts as you want. So if you are an IT admin and you've got your domain administrator account, you've got your server administrator account, you've got your general everyday use account, you can create 3 different sets of credentials and then apply them to a folder of computers. Then when you make connections, you don't have to manually type in that password either. And you can protect all that with passkeys or MFA if you want to. Knowing that I have one set of credentials for both of my Windows workstations and then one set of credentials for both of my Apple workstations, I can create new creds in this folder. So I'll go to add, new credential entry, and I'm going to do username and password. Username for my Windows workstations is my username, and then my password is nipple. Now, there are other options within these dialog boxes that you can use if you want, as well as multi-factor authentication. I just need a username and password. I'm not on a domain. I'm on a work group, so I'm just going to hit add. Those credentials are created as an entry on the left side. And if you want, you can just collapse that folder. It's totally up to you. I want to be able to use that credential entry for all of my Windows workstations. So hold down Control and click these 3 devices, right click, go to Edit, Batch Edit, Edit Saved Credentials. And this is where you can say, hey, anytime I connect to these devices, I want to use these credentials, or I want to use this set of credentials. And if you create multiple credential entries, you can choose when you start that remote session, which credentials you want to use. That way you're not married to a single set. You can say, I want to be a domain admin for this connection at this time. I just want to be a server admin at this time, so on and so forth. You'll see credential mode, and there are a bunch of different options. I'm not going to dive too crazy into this, but your vault is the vault that is tied to your data source. So currently this data source lives only on this machine. So any credentials that I would create would only get saved on this machine, but you can choose to have your data source stored in Devolutions Hub, which means that you can save any credentials that you've created in the cloud so that they sync from device to device. The other option is you as a user using RDM, you have a set of personal credentials. So you could say, hey, RDM, anytime I create a session, use the credentials that I have given myself for my remote sessions, and then it'll just use that automatically. However, I've already created a credential for myself in that folder over here. So I can change the credential mode to linked vault. And then when I open this dropdown, there it is. Click that, hit save. You might have missed it. There was a little change on this screen. As soon as I batch edited those entries, it added a little credentials line item. So I can see anytime I connect to this session, it's going to use these credentials by default. Now I would remote into this machine right now and show you, but if I do that, it's going to log out of here and it's going to cut my recording. So I'm not going to do that quite yet. I'm going to have to do some recordings over at my Mac so that I can not disrupt what's going on here. So this is me over on my Mac. I just want to illustrate how the connections work after you've gotten all of your assets set up. So over on the left side, this is going to look a little bit different too, because this data source that I'm using right now is my data source that is in the cloud using the Devolutions Hub. And if I actually click this little drop down here, you can see that I can swap between the local data source that I used to use before I switched to the cloud, and then the one that I'm currently using now, which is tied to my Devolutions account. So I've got one of my NASs here with 2 different entries, both for SSH, and then I've got my gaming PC and I have my streaming PC. I have already created my credentials. So all the credentials that I use for remote access are here for my Windows machines. And then I also have the same type of folder. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. Yep, there it is. I thought I lost it for a second. There's my creds for Mac OS as well. So if I double click on my gaming PC, that opens that remote session. It opened this up in a tab. I can do the same for the recording PC, double click. And this was an entry that I actually baked my credentials into because I only have one set of credentials for this machine where I have multiple for this machine. So you can see it actually just logged right in. So if you want to do that instead, you can. And then just for fun, I'm come up here to one of my NASs and initiate an SSH tunnel. I want to choose my root credentials for that, hit OK, and I'm in. And then you can bounce between those remote sessions using these tabs at the top. If I want to break out one of those remote sessions into a split screen, I can do that. You'll see I got my recording PC on the left, SSH on the right. If you want to break out that session into its own window, so like if you wanted to full screen just this remote session and leave these other ones docked, you can do that. You can also bring this one back in. Whoops, grab it by the tab, bring it back in. And what I like about this setup too is you can really organize all of this however you want. If you want to do them by workstation type, by operating system, by access, there's so many different ways that you can kind of break this down and make it your own. I've also got my M2 MacBook Air here. You can see there is both an SSH tunnel and an Apple Remote Desktop entry that I can use. Double click on the laptop, you'll get that pop-up. Of course, I want that high performance. I'm on a 10 gig internal network, please and thank you. And it allows you to choose between 1 or 2 virtual displays. I pretty rarely need 2 virtual displays, so I usually just roll with one. Wake up, laptop. Oh God, wake up. Please wake up. There we go. So templates is the next thing that we're going to touch on. Templates are super cool, even for smaller deployments like me inside this house. It makes things consistent and quicker to access. For example, out of the 6 or 7 Windows workstations that are in this house and online, I don't think any of them have the same resolution or aspect ratio for the display. And some computers are connected to 4K TVs. They've got custom scaling. So instead of dealing with all of the annoyances that come with remoting into different machines with all these different sizes and scalings and graphic differences, I can create a template that says, hey, every workstation in this folder, start every Windows RDP session in 1920 by 1080p, do it in 16-bit color instead of 32-bit. I don't want you to mess with any audio. Make sure the Windows key pass-through is turned on. And then all of those settings are applied to every single endpoint that's in that folder. And you can just create as many templates as you want for all the different types of devices you have. So to create a new template, come up to File, Templates. Let's do an entry template. We're on the templates page, right click, add template. Because we're doing a local data source only and it's just me, myself, and I'm gonna create a template just for myself. Doesn't need to be a shared template. I want this template to be for remote desktop. So let's do RDP, double click. Username and password for different sessions, always gonna be different. I'm not really worried about that. So I'm gonna pop over to display and I want my sizing mode to always be smart resizing so that if I break that session out of a tab and I want to resize the window, it'll automatically change based on what size it is. For me, because I'm always on a 1440p monitor, I just prefer to have my remote sessions be 1920 by 1080, so they're just a little bit smaller than my display. So scroll down here on the remote desktop size, do 1080. Local resources, it's very rare that I need audio for remote sessions, so I'll just either do not play or leave on remote computer. I want to make sure that the Alt Tab and Windows key are passed through, so I don't typically mess with any of the keyboard settings. Clipboard, yes, I want on. All my printers are networked. I don't need that going over the remote session. And then just from this screen, you can see how many different options you have for creating these templates. So I'm going to call this one my default Windows RDP, save and open. You know what? I'm going to take one for the team. I'm going to try and remote connect to my recording computer, see what happens. And just like that, my credentials were saved in my personal vault on this machine. All of my RDP settings, my display, my sound, all the things that I wanted baked into my template, everything is automatically loaded and I'm in the remote session. And if I wanted to open up a bunch of different sessions, they would all show up under different tabs up here. So I'm going to close out of this remote session. Want to sign into Devolutions Hub? I just got an error that there was a version mismatch and it can't sync. So I'm going to update my clients, and then I'm going to re-record this later. Hey, Nicholas, do you think it's a good idea to update things in the middle of recording a YouTube video? Do you think that it might halt production and force you to pick back up the next day? Yeah? No. So if you try to use like a shared data source, like one that's stored in Devolutions Hub, you're going to get a prompt to log in. So if you already have a Devolutions account, you can just use that email to sign into RDM on the machine. And then that's what it'll use to sync your data back and forth. Not sync your data, but access the data that is in the cloud. So if I go up to File, my account settings, and click on Devolutions Hub, put in my email address that I use for this, hit save. So right now on my Windows workstation, I want to access the data source that I have in the cloud. So come up to File, Data Sources, Add New. I want to do Hub, not that hub. Put in my name and the email that I use for my Devolutions account, hit Add, and then hit save. And now in this data source, you can see all of the hosts and the folders that I created. So I actually created this data source over on my Mac Mini over there. That's how I have set up my entire organization within RDM. And in the same way I was doing over there, if I want to switch back to my local data source instead, the one that I just have on this machine, just like that. If I wanted to go back to my Mac workstations, open up my MacBook Air, do an Apple Remote Desktop, double click, I close the lid. It's probably asleep. You get the idea. And that is your introduction to Remote Desktop Manager Free Solo Edition. Everything that you saw today is free to use, and you can test run or run without creating an account if you want. There's going to be some links in the description and the pinned comments if you decide that you want to give this a try. The only part I showed that requires an account but is still free is if you want to use the Devolutions hub to sync or to store your data source in the cloud so that you can access it on multiple PCs. Again, not a requirement. If you want to run Devolution server locally so that you can just skip over that, you can do that. It's just a little bit more involved. If you have any questions that went unanswered or even any feedback for the Devolutions team, I'm going to be reading through the comments. I'm sure they will as well. Please leave any feedback that you have. If you don't have any feedback, you just want to tell me I'm pretty even though I'm bald, that would be nice. Please. I'll make you a cheesesteak.